Hello and good morning and good afternoon, as the case might be, and welcome to Deloitte's Tech Trends 2021 session on this fine Wednesday, where we are going to be discussing the three of our tech trends that collectively represent what we believe are the changes to the heart of the enterprise. Today we are going to be discussing strategy engineered trend, the core revival trend, and the supply unchained trend. And those are the three trends of our 9 trends discussed in our 2021 report. It gives me great pleasure to be joined this afternoon by two of my colleagues and friends, Scott Buchholz, who is also the lead author and editor of our Global Tech Trends publication, and the Deloitte CTO dialing in from Washington, D.C., who is going to lead us through the conversation. And we are also joined by Kevin Young, my partner at Deloitte Canada, who is leading our cloud transformation practice in Canada, and also is our champion for this particular set of tech trends. As we give our audience a couple of minutes to dial in, I'm just going to remind everyone that this presentation is a part of a series of presentations that we are providing to cover and unveil our 2021 tech trends. Many of you dialed into our webcast 2 weeks ago, where we provided the overview of both the tech trends concept background and then the 9 trends that were published in 2021. And then we are now following up with 3 individual deep dive sessions where we are going to cover 3 related trends in each of those sessions. So today on this fine Wednesday, February 17th, 2021, we are covering the trends that deal with the heart of the enterprise, as I mentioned. Then it is going to be 3 weeks from now. We had to actually make a small scheduling adjustment. 3 weeks from now, we are going to be delving into the 3 trends that deal with data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So on March the 10th, at the same time, at noon Eastern on Wednesday, we'll be covering those. And then a week after that, on March the 17th, we are going to wrap it up by discussing and doing a deeper dive into the final 3 trends that deal with people and interactions of physical with digital environments. This session is going to be 1 hour long, and for the first 45 minutes, we are going to be hearing from Scott with some color commentary from Kevin, but we will also reserve the final 15 minutes for your questions. So if you do have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to send them through our Q&A function of this Zoom presentation. This presentation is also being recorded. So if you know of anyone who would be interested to see it later, please do email me and I will be happy to send that link. Also, for everyone who has registered to attend this session, I will be following up with a thank you note that will also include this presentation deck, so you will have that available to you. So with that, we are now 4 minutes into the hour, and probably enough time for everybody to get that calendar notification, click on the link, register, and join us. So with that, I'll pass it on to Kevin for his brief introduction and to get us going. So Kevin, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Dalibor. Very excited to be here. I've been with the firm for 15 years. I grew up in our banking sector and used to lead our financial services transformation practice. As Dalibor mentioned, I now lead our cloud transformation team for Canada. And we work with clients to help with their journey to the cloud, everything from migration and modernization to all of the other dimensions required for success: talent, operating model, cybersecurity, looking at some of the risk and compliance dimensions. I'm also, as Dalibor mentioned, the Canadian champion for these trends. And really what that means is I am a sort of single point of contact and gateway to our broader firm should this presentation spark any questions or ideas on your end that you want to follow up with after this presentation. Scott, over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. And thanks to both of you for the invitation to come join all of you in our frigid greater north up there. I'm talking to you today from outside of Washington, D.C. If I look out the window, there's no snow on the ground, although it's been threatened for this evening. So an inch or two of snow shuts down, sorry, we're doing centimeters. A couple centimeters of snow shuts down the greater Washington area. So that should be our exciting day tomorrow. All right. I actually have the privilege of leading our technology trends report. So we look globally across industries. And one of the great things about it is I get to talk to clients and individuals like yourselves about the journey people are on. I get to interview a whole bunch of people to talk about what their journeys have been like. And I get to do this and share these stories with you. So some of the most fun aspects of my job are actually to be able to spend time with folks like all of yourselves on the webinar, learning about what you're up to, what you're doing, what you're seeing work, what you're seeing be a little bit harder. And as my good friend Mike Bechtel sometimes points out, we like to be the historians from the future for all of you. So that's a little bit of what we're up to today. Just so everybody knows, we went through this last time. I will cover this briefly. This is actually our 12th year of doing Tech Trends, looking globally at what's just over the horizon for enterprise technology. Our reports are all freely available. You can go download them on the internet. You can just type Deloitte Tech Trends into your favorite search engine and the results will pop right up. You can read not just this year's report, but also previous year's reports, because we're trying to see what's nascent today in enterprise technology that's likely to be at scale in 18 to 24 months. It's often interesting to see how good we were. If you'd like to check us on how accurate we've been, we think our track record's pretty good. You may disagree. I'm happy to talk about that too. The other thing I'd say is, the nice thing about the reports, this year's might be a svelte 166 pages, but that's actually because there are a lot of really great client stories and other resources for you. So don't be intimidated by the size. All right. If we can go to our Star Wars walk. Yes, those of us who do this report are geeks or nerds, or pick your favorite adjective. And so we love us a good Star Wars thing. Hopefully there are no trademark lawyers listening to this conversation. But look, here's what this looks like. We've been doing this for 12 years. You can actually see that we were bullish on cloud 12 years ago back in the day. It's hard to remember those times, but that was a time when everybody thought we were smoking something to be saying that cloud was going to become a transformational set of technologies. Look how far we've come. And the interesting part about this is not just that you can go read all of our reports and research from previous years, as I mentioned, online, but also if you look across the top, the thing we've learned by doing this research over and over again is that emerging technology isn't a collection of shiny objects. It's not entirely accidental. It actually does tend to happen in recurring patterns. And those recurring patterns we actually refer to as our macro forces. They're that colored line across the top. And it's actually the framework that we use to organize our taxonomy of emerging technology change. It's the framework we use internally to think about emerging technology investments. And it's the framework that we use to guide our research as we're trying to figure out what's interesting and what's just over the horizon as we go through and do our research every year. So this is a really helpful frame in that regard. So for 2021, we had 9 trends. We talked to you a little bit about them 2 weeks ago. You're welcome to go back and look at that. You're welcome also to download the executive summaries from our website. The way we think about them is in 3 groupings of 3. As Dalibor mentioned, this week's webinar is actually focused on the heart of the enterprise trends, and we'll get into those in a minute. In 2 weeks, you can hear all about the art of the possible in data from some of our experts in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then last but not least, 2 weeks after that is all about how we're seeing experiences change and emerge as digital and physical are becoming increasingly intertwined for all of us. As we've all been forced to live in the little green boxes on the screen, right? What does that mean for life outside of little green boxes, and hopefully one of these days outside of our houses? So looking forward to that. Okay, so with that, we're going to get started. Strategy engineered. So obviously this idea of engineering is interesting. Historically, I think if many of us think about the function of corporate strategy or organizational strategy, it's something that people tend to associate with cufflinks and hardcover books. It's sort of this exercise that gets done off in a corner every once in a while by a bunch of really smart people who decide what our organizational or corporate direction is going to be for the next period of time. Well, here's what's actually really interesting is if you look around, what you realize is that increasingly technology is an integral part of enabling all of our corporate strategies. What does that mean? Well, think about it this way. If you have a corporate strategy that says we need to make a particular choice to go in a particular direction, and your technology doesn't support it, guess which way you're not going? And so increasingly, the idea of corporate strategy and technology strategy are becoming increasingly intertwined. One enables the other. They are increasingly reinforcing. And so that's actually leading to a number of changes in terms of the way those who are thinking about strategy or thinking about things. It's leading to, and the degree of technology change we're seeing today is leading to an increased agility or, rate of change in terms of corporate strategy. And so there are a lot of really interesting things we're seeing in this space. So maybe if we can go to the next slide. What you'll see is this, right? So strategy leading technology in the lower left. Here, what we're really seeing is we're seeing those who have been, hitherto the cufflinks and hard book crowd are becoming increasingly technology savvy, right? Because it is increasingly the case that they need to understand what are the implications of the technology choices we're making. How are we actually making these decisions? How are these decisions actually being implemented and driven into the technology organization? And conversely, by the way, that means the technology organization is increasingly becoming or being asked to become aware of the business implications of the choices that are being made. So from the board of the directors all the way down to the developers and the data scientists who are making the individual decisions, how do we make sure that we're all aligned on the right outcomes, that we're all aligned on the same set of assumptions, right? How do we make sure that we're all basically heading in the same direction? And it becomes increasingly important as you think about this, because those are the things that actually enable us to move in the same direction at speed. Well, what's a future-ready strategy? I mean, if you think about it, strategy is really all about making choices and assumptions. And as Professor Fuller said when we interviewed him, he's a professor at Harvard Business School, it's the assumptions that kill you, right, in terms of strategy. And so when we're thinking about how we formulate our strategies and where we're going to play and how we're going to play, right, it's really important to be clear about what are the assumptions and other things. So here's an example, right? Some organizations who are in the food business have said for many years, the plant-based proteins, the artificial meats, the, cloning cow cells, the whatever sort of substitutes for, raising animals for protein have clearly been something that people have been talking about for a decade or two. And when those came to your local supermarket and people bought them, that was going to be the time when they would decide to invest in that area, because they didn't want to get in too early before the capability and technology was proven, and they didn't want to get in too late after it had already become mainstream. And what's interesting is some of our customers set out that as a deliberate assumption and a deliberate part of their strategy. And then that day came and went, and they didn't actually notice. And so now they're finding themselves in a situation where getting caught up becomes a very expensive proposition. So rethinking, right, how do we figure these things out is interesting. Well, that actually leads to the third part of this trend that we've noticed, which is people are increasingly saying, look, we know what our assumptions are. We know what we've decided to do internally. We know what our external triggers are. Why can't we monitor them? And increasingly, the answer is we can. We can monitor them with various sorts of tools, using artificial intelligence and machine learning, using reporting and other things. We can increasingly start determining, we've said we would focus in this area. Are we in fact focused in that area? We've said we will do student body shift left when the following types of events occur. Have the following types of events occurred? So increasingly what we're seeing is technology enablement in the formulation of strategy, in the monitoring of strategy, in the ongoing sort of measurement of the effectiveness of the strategy. People are starting to say, let's move out of the era of PowerPoint and printed books, and let's really move into leaning into this technology. And if you think about how does this get real, I'll share a couple of examples with some of the folks we talked to. So one of my favorite parts of the discussion we had with Professor Fuller, again, the Harvard Business School gentleman, was actually, he said, here's a funny thing. For those who aren't familiar, NASCAR is one of the racing circuits in the United States. And NASCAR, the way it works is that you have one driver, and they have a car that's built for them, and they have a pit crew that maintains that car. So we have this completely bespoke setup where everybody basically gets their own exact setup. They decided one time that they would actually have a race where everybody got the same car and everybody got the same pit crew, which meant you were no longer measuring the performance of the team, but you were actually measuring the performance of the driver, because everybody was equal in terms of the technology, and it was all about how you drove the car around the track. Well, guess what? If we look around us, the technology field has been leveled. The hyperscalers have made sure that everybody can have access to basically the same technology. We all run basically the same ERP systems. We believe that we're in a world where we're playing the team sport of car racing. And in point of fact, we are increasingly in a world where the skill of the driver is what makes the difference. And if you think about that for a moment, what that means is that this is a thing that we can ill afford to get wrong, because increasingly this whole corporate strategy, technology implementation, and linking all of those things together is our ability to drive the car. And so as you think about that, as you move forward, I would encourage all of you to reflect on whether or not you can do better individually and collectively, because this is going to become an increasingly important topic as we go forward. The other thing I'll say, by the way, is the other individual we interviewed for this was actually Peter Schwartz of Salesforce. And Peter Schwartz is considered by some to be the father of scenario planning. He helped invent that idea when he was at Shell. And some of the really interesting things they told us about Salesforce was when COVID hit last year, they actually took their scenario cycle planning from 5 years down to 7 months. And so if you think about that, 5 years is a long time to think about what the future might be like. Going from 5 years to 7 months is a really big decision. And it was really important because of all of the factors and the unknowns. If you can think back a year ago, none of us knew if this technology would work and how and everything else. More interestingly, though, one of the things that they did to try to get everybody in the organization understanding this is they actually decided to share those scenarios and strategic choices with the entire Salesforce organization, with the rationale that if everybody understood how the executives were thinking, then that was going to better enable everybody to move in the same direction at speed. And so increasingly what we're seeing is creativity and different ways that people are trying to figure out how do we actually embody and make this trend come alive. And I would suggest that, thinking and spending some time on this is something that's worth your while. So Kevin, what would you add to that?
Hey, Scott, when I think of alignment between business and technology with respect to strategy, what we hear from a lot of our technology leaders within the clients that we speak with is, perhaps a bit of challenge in terms of the headwinds and focus on cost reduction, and the fact that so much of the low-hanging fruit has been picked over. And so when we think about that alignment, it's almost a prerequisite to get some of the bigger things done required now to drive change. And when you talk about choices with the Salesforce example, I think of a conversation that we had with one of our Canadian clients who just took a new role as the CIO for a wealth management firm, and thinking through his tech strategy. I mean, it started with a conversation with the business, and this particular company had grown through a series of acquisitions that had created a bit of a hodgepodge of different platforms within the technology environment that hadn't been fully integrated. And when you start with a bit of education around, this is what the technology stack looks like for a discount brokerage that is geared towards truly leading digital self-serve capabilities, leading UI UX experience for customers, versus the set of technology capabilities required to support a full service wealth advisory business. And all that entails around client intelligence, CRM, enablement for the advisor. It's very different. And can you create a leading technology platform for both? Sure, but in a world of limited resources, it starts with making choices, with business choices around setting priorities for that. And I think just bridging that gap and helping his business leaders understand the different technology options that underpin those different businesses was pretty critical to moving that forward.
This one actually puts, I think, the message here is that what we are observing is the onus now on business to actually apply themselves to understand the technology, bringing the technology leaders together to make one strategy as the strategy that's informed by the data, and then having tools to allow that to be managed, adjusted, improved in close to real time, if not real time. So that I think is a very, 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 very new technologically enabled trend to merge these business and technology strategies into capital S strategy, and very, very interesting.
Yeah. One thought on that, Dalibor, is a Fortune 50 CIO I know, when we were talking one day, said that he remembered the day when he started his career when CEOs were proud of the fact that they didn't know anything about technology. That those guys and gals down there somewhere in the bowels of the organization were going to be making stuff happen, and that was not their problem.
Yeah.
And his comment was, can you imagine those same CEOs saying the same thing about accounting or legal or contracts or you name it, right? And the nice thing is that what we've seen increasingly over the past several years is a movement towards executives, business executives and CEOs recognizing that it's actually really important that they understand the technology, because increasingly organizational success is far more reliant on it. Okay, core revival. So core is our shorthand for the back office, mid office, and front office systems that actually help run everybody's organization and enterprise. Sometimes we call them legacy systems. Sometimes we call them ERP systems. There's a whole range of these. But the idea is fundamentally, there are a set of applications and systems and services that keep our organizations running. And what we're starting to see is a little bit accelerated by COVID, or in some cases, a lot accelerated by COVID, people going back and saying, maybe some of the things that we thought were so true about what we could and couldn't do, what was a good idea or not, we actually need to go back and relook at, because increasingly, these are things that are vitally important for organizational success, right? Think about the last trend. We've said you need to have your strategy aligned with your technology. This is a lot of the technology that makes your strategy go. So if those things aren't revised, modernized, refreshed, at least cleaned up, right? That's when you wind up with dissonance in terms of your ability to execute. So maybe if we can go to the next slide. We saw 3 really big buckets of stuff in this trend. And the thing that I want to say is this trend is actually really big. It covers a whole lot of waterfront. There are a whole lot of different places to go. But the first thing to think about is making a different business case, making a new business case, rethinking the way we do business cases. And here, what we've actually seen is a variety of different things. So on one hand, we've seen service providers and cloud providers get much more creative about financing arrangements, about deal structures, about willingness to contribute capital to modernizations and transformations. So the global hyperscalers are very interested in having your systems running in their environments. And in a number of cases, they have millions of dollars that they are willing to contribute to your success migrating onto their infrastructure. That's really interesting for a lot of organizations to look at. It changes a lot of the dynamics of whether or not things are possible. But in addition, what we're seeing is people saying, in the hospitality industry, volume is down, we'd like to do our modernization now. And there are some increasingly creative financing arrangements that are being arranged, and cost arrangements that are being arranged for those transformations. In addition, what we've also seen is people say, a lot of times what we do is if we're revitalizing something, right, we're taking a piece out, we're cleaning a piece up, we're bolting a piece on, we're modernizing, we're transforming, we're making changes to improve things. People just look at it one application at a time. And what winds up happening is if you look at a process, it typically crosses a whole bunch of systems because the process exists and we've kind of installed a whole bunch of piece parts to enable it over time. And it turns out that if you look at a process for revitalization, for transformation, for cleaning up, for what have you, typically the business case for redoing that makes a lot more sense than cleaning up any individual piece part, right? So the sum being greater than the sum of the parts really does become a truism when people look at this space. And, there are a lot of really creative financing arrangements going on. So that's sort of business cases and rethinking those. The second really big area is transforming custom code. So a lot of us come to this problem with a whole lot of systems that were written. Actually, I work with some government clients who have systems that were written in the late 1960s. They process hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars. And so for some reason, the idea of breaking them, nobody has a sense of humor about that. So, they become very difficult problems. And we wind up finding ourselves in situations where people are saying, hey, people who've built this system have perhaps retired. They're no longer with us regardless. We actually need to figure out how do we accelerate our journeys. We need something that's more future-proof, that's more buzzword compliant. We might just need to fix the user interface on this thing. Whichever of those things people are winding up saying, we're starting to see a lot more creativity and capability in terms of getting those things to happen. So in the new tools, sort of shiny object section of this, we're increasingly seeing power in low-code platforms. So whether it's some of the dedicated platforms like OutSystems and Appian, whether it's some of the Salesforce or others moving into this space, we're starting to see a lot more capability that people can actually bring to the table. People are rethinking, hey, do I need to rebuild my user interface in COBOL or what have you, or can I use one of these platforms to actually do it for me? And the same for integration, and the same for some of the business logic, and the same for, and so we're seeing people increasingly experiment with that. We're also seeing people increasingly experiment with, hey, I've got a whole lot of legacy code. It would be really good to get the business rules out. I'm pretty sure I know what it does. I'm not entirely confident. So we're seeing tools that are actually accelerating the ability to actually extract those business rules. We're seeing people increasingly rethink, how can we take some of those major old legacy systems and divvy them up to start service enabling them and maybe modernizing piece parts in a service-based way. We're seeing people rethink, if we're on the mainframe, can we use some of the code translators and libraries to actually get us from the mainframe to the cloud? And increasingly, the answer to that is yes. And so there's a whole spectrum of technology that we're actually seeing happen. Just one of those examples was actually a Portuguese wine producer we got to talk to, which was, unfortunately, it's COVID times. Otherwise, I think they probably would have been one of my favorite interviews, because I would have needed to go visit them to make sure that I fully understood the story. But what they've actually been doing is they've been using a low-code platform, in part because it was really hard for them to get the interface to their ERP system out to the vineyards. And so they were trying to figure out, how did they connect the vineyards? How did they connect some of their consumers? How did they connect some of the distributors? How did they connect the restaurants they serve? All of those things. It was not easy with their ERP system. And when they looked at custom code, it looked like it was going to take a lot longer and offer a lot less functionality. And so in their case, it turns out that picking a low-code platform was actually the right idea. And they've been able to get some really interesting and great results with that choice, including, but not limited to, being able to put the system out in the vineyards when that's necessary, being able to connect to the sensors on the winemaking apparatus, and all of the other things. Like I said, I need the tour, the real one, not the virtual one, because I feel that's really going to give me a better sense of this journey. But that'll wait a year or two. And then last but not least, we have ERP systems. And so many of us have ERP systems for HR, for finance, for supply chain, for all manner of other functions in the back office. What we're seeing is a lot of people are re-looking hard at their ERP systems. They often have a lot of technical debt. We've often implemented a lot of things in them that we never bothered to use. You know, that feature that the users assured us was going to be necessary, that it turns out nobody has used in the 15 years since we built it. You know, those are the kinds of things that people are increasingly saying, hey, maybe we need to rethink how we do this differently. Maybe we need to rethink what actually belongs in the ERP and what might belong on the outside. Right? Maybe we use a low-code platform. Maybe we use a different platform for the user interface. Maybe we, do the user interfaces differently. Maybe we use a different platform for analytics. Maybe we use a different platform for our pricing engine. We use services and other things. How do we integrate these things differently and better? And really, if you think about it, what they're trying to do is shrink the footprint of the ERP system and shrink the amount of technical debt that's included so that they can go faster. And our best example of this, I think, or one of the better examples, was Albemarle, whom we talked to. So Albemarle is a global chemical producer. They are a chemical organization, and they produce and make lots of different chemicals. And they had grown by acquisition. I believe that they had one of every ERP system and several of them, right? And they said, in order to continue our strategy, we really need to sort of rationalize this and get this down. And they decided that they were going to have one global ERP system, and they actually implemented SAP chemicals for their choice out of the box. They had, when they were done, I believe, 73 customizations, most of which were interfaces, a handful of which were reports. The CIO apparently sometimes spent 2 days fighting a 2-hour customization because that was actually the battle that needed to be fought to keep all of those good ideas out of the core of the system. The result was actually that they got done in a fairly short period of time, but they were actually able to upgrade their global ERP in the space of a couple of months, which has to be some kind of speed record for ERP systems. And they've actually found that it works really well for them, that people were able to adapt to it and adopt it quickly. And so what's clear is a lot of us have limits on what we think is possible that may or may not actually be nearly as true as we think. And so, looking at all of this writ large, there's a lot of change. Not all of it is just rip and replace, right? There's a lot of creativity as well around revitalize and, my technical term is gussy up the systems on your journey to full buzzword compliance. But I would say if you have been putting off looking at some of your back office or legacy or core systems because it was hard and challenging and what have you, you might want to look again at some of the possibilities the technology is enabling. So Kevin, what did I forget?
No, I think all of that is well said, Scott. The clients that we speak with here in Canada, there is a sense that COVID really exposed the limitations of their legacy systems. For our large enterprise clients, they could feel very acutely the differences with respect to different parts of their environment. Platforms that were cloud enabled or more modern versus some of their legacy systems, as so much of their work translated to a remote workforce had to be digitized or virtualized as far as different parts of their business. For a lot of our clients, this is less about what and more about how, and certainly the business case is still a big stumbling block to that. We do tend to refer to limitations in terms of the 3 C's: cash, capacity, and capability. And this is where I think certainly partners can help. And within Canada, we're just starting to see some of the alternative deal structures, deal engineering that you referred to, Scott. I think a lot of that comes down to the ability to finance some of the upfront transformation or modernization work that's required against a recurring annuity stream of some kind. Whether that is a managed service contract with an outsourcer or an SI, or whether it is, to your point, a multi-year commit for cloud consumption with one of the big hyperscalers. I expect we'll continue to see more of that, because certainly the aspiration and the desire is there on the part of multiple parties, and certainly within our clients. When I think about some of the tools that you referred to there around transforming custom code, if I reflect on our cloud migration factory, certainly we couldn't do that. Like, we've seen the power of some of those tools firsthand. Over the last couple of years, we've made acquisitions in a company called Adadata, which is basically a discovery and assessment tool, which automatically helps map out the IT environment and support the migration of workloads. And then Inawake would be the other big piece, which is more of that code conversion that you referred to, Scott. And so for some of these legacy systems, it's literally millions of lines of code for legacy applications that need to be converted over as part of that modernization process. So certainly, I think a lot resonates here with what we're seeing in the Canadian market for sure.
And finally, I think that but public sector is actually very, very finally actively investing in that core legacy modernization. And we can see from going literally from province to province to province to province that these transformations now are occurring from legacy systems, many of them even custom systems, right onto the cloud-enabled platforms, on hyperscaler environments. So this is clearly evident and very real, finally, very real.
Yeah. And by the way, that's true in the United States as well. I mean, and you can find examples across the spectrum in every industry, from those who have some work to do to those who are, working hard to keep pace with the digital natives. Okay, our last trend for today is supply unchained. So I think many of us recognize that when COVID hit, supply chains were tested in ways that they hadn't been in a really long time. So whether it's the shortage of toilet paper, at least here down south of all y'all, or it's been exercise equipment, or pick your favorite thing, what's been pretty clear is that people's comfort and confidence in their ability to manage their supply chains was probably optimistic. And that's true whether it's ranging from the fact that people woke up to discover that there is a single maker of black pigment in Japan who actually supplies all of the pigment for all of the black cars and trucks in the world, to the idea that some of our clients were actually aware of supply chain disruptions within hours of them starting to occur. And for some of our clients, it took weeks and months for them to get to the same level of detail and information. And so what we're starting to see is people say, right, this is the time for digital transformation. This is the time to rethink the relative balance, the degree of just in time, the where things are happening and how they're happening and everything else. So if we can go maybe to the next slide for a moment. I think what we're seeing is people start to say, hey, does all of this really need to be just a cost center? I think in a lot of organizations, if we look at the silos of excellence that we've achieved that range from, sales and marketing to all the way back through procurement and supply chain management and manufacturing in some cases, and logistics and distribution, what we tend to have is a whole set of independently operating units that are optimized for their individual function. And we've optimized most of them with the idea that these are actually things that just cost money that we have to do, as opposed to these are potential sources of value. Well, if you actually look at what a lot of the really successful digital natives have done, is they've actually discovered that they can price based on customer value. So in order to extract more value from the customers, they say, who's willing to pay for premium delivery? Who's willing to pay for premium options? Who's willing to pay for all of these things? And based on that set of choices, let's connect all the way back through, all the way to where everything starts, and make sure that we've aligned the entire system end to end on not just costing the least amount of money, but actually driving the most amount of value. So people are starting to rethink some of the old adages about some of these functions, to start saying, hey, can we actually use these things to derive more revenue, to derive more profitability, to better target everything in between procurement and manufacturing and distribution and everything else in order to do better. And in order to do that, what they've realized is you can call it digital transformation, we can call it interoperable data, you can call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, if it takes an email to make it from sales all the way back to procurement across several different organizations for us to figure out that something's going wrong, that's probably not a time-efficient, effective way of actually operating across the enterprise. So people are starting to say, hey, let's figure out how we connect the data between all of these different functional areas of excellence, right? Let's figure out how we connect those things together in something closer to real time, so that sales signals make it all the way to procurement and vice versa, so that we can tailor what's going on the manufacturing floor based on what we see that's going on out in the world with our clients and customers. And basically, if we can do all of that, then can we start using AI and machine learning to do better planning, to do better predictive modeling, to do better connectivity, to do a better job of predicting where everything is and where it should be going next throughout our entire sort of chain of logistics. And so what's really interesting is we're seeing a number of organizations say, hey, the time has come, we need to change. And one of the conversations with our clients around this was actually them saying, I'm the chief digital officer for an old-fashioned manufacturer. And I'm here to help us figure out how to do just what I've been talking about. How do we get more value out of the end of this? How do we interoperate better within our organization? But what he said that was really interesting was he said, my goal is to turn us from a transaction processing organization into an analytics management organization, right? So the idea that today, a lot of people in that organization were managing individual transactions and transaction entry and so forth. But what the goal was actually to get people to using the power of analytics to actually do those things. And so as people have gone through this journey, right, they said we need to sort of align on value. We need to be able to interoperate across all of our units. And the other thing people are learning is, hey, for safety reasons, for all sorts of other reasons, we have a whole bunch of new technology that's available to us that we can use differently, better, and well, right? Whether that's robots and cobots in manufacturing and logistics, right? Whether that's the use of drones to do monitoring and inspections, whether that's the use of cameras for inspections, both equipment and quality and so forth, or of whether or not the human beings who are in spaces are actually maintaining social distancing like they're supposed to. There's this huge range of technology that people are increasingly relooking at to make sure that we're all sort of moving in the right direction at speed. And so that's a lot of what's going on in organizations as they're rethinking all of these things. And COVID is clearly a driving force, but a lot of these things have been bubbling for years. And so this is just unfortunately, our global pandemic has just helped focus the minds. So, Kevin, what am I forgetting?
Yeah, Scott, I mean, the only thing I'd add is a concept that our supply chain practice is working on with a number of our clients around control towers. And as you said, I mean, this was something that was prevalent before the pandemic, but has certainly picked up in the wake of that in a big way. It's essentially a sensing platform that aggregates data from the company from across its supply chain and distribution networks, as well as third-party data sources, and it leverages AI and machine learning, in some cases, data coming from IoT devices to provide that level of real-time visibility across the supply chain from their various centers of production and distribution to the end customer.
Yeah, it's there's a lot more. I think for a number of years, people would have said that this has been a somewhat sleepy space on some level. And what's clear is that a lot of change is here and possible.
That's excellent. So thank you very much, Kevin and Scott. We are now going to move into the final few minutes where we wanted to sort of open it up for some questions. So the audience members, if you, of course, have a question, some questions are already coming, but if you do want to ask a question now using the Q&A function of the Zoom presentation, please do submit those questions. There is a question that came through on the rise of quantum crypto and post-quantum crypto as a defense. So I wonder, Scott, if you might have any sort of commentary on that topic.
Sure. So not as sort of core to what we've been talking about today. It is one of the other hats I wear in Deloitte. I actually lead for our US firm a lot of our efforts around quantum computing research and other things. Here's what I would say is, depending on whose estimate you believe, the ability to actually use quantum computers to break our existing cryptography algorithms, which is a topic that's been discussed for a number of years, is anywhere between 5 and 20 years away. And so, some of the concern depends a little bit on whom you believe. I would also say, though, that it's probably not a tomorrow problem, but it is something that people should be getting ready for. And so what that means is, wow. Unfortunately, I know way too much about this, so I can give a really long answer. But the short answer is, because quantum computers operate differently, they can do things that you can't do with your laptops or even today's supercomputers. And as a result, we need a new system of cryptography. There are a number of algorithms being investigated. It is currently undecided which of those are actually the right ones to use. And the best thing that people should be thinking about while the experts are going through and picking the right ones for all of the rest of us is, what data do I have? How is it secured? Knowing what ways I'm currently securing data today and where it's located. And perhaps most importantly, all of the basic things we do from a cybersecurity hygiene perspective are really important, because as I remind people, you cannot decrypt data you do not have. So if you just keep people from getting it out of your organization in the first place, that's 80% of the battle.
Very good, excellent. A couple of additional questions that came through. One touches on data analytics services, and are you observing, are we seeing or sensing any significant movement or trend in the use of data analytics services such as Snowflake, for example? Do you have any commentary on that, Scott, either you or Kevin?
Do you want to go, Kevin, or you want me to go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say in general, cloud is just so perfect for data analytics and AI, just in terms of the ability to stand up and stand down environments quickly. That kind of scalability and elasticity is very conducive to the types of experimentation that a lot of our clients are doing with these tools. And then certainly within the platforms of each of the major hyperscalers, of platforms like Snowflake, the access to advanced analytics and AI tools that you can get is it's growing more sophisticated, I think, with each new year. I think more recently we've seen a push for more interoperability across different platforms, across different cloud providers, for multi-cloud clients as well. And so I think certainly the use of cloud-based platforms for data and analytics provided as a service by some of these major providers is only going to increase within the next 12 to 24 months for sure.
Yeah. And in 2 weeks, if you come back to listen to our podcast, you'll be able to hear all about it in lots of detail. But the long and the short of it is, as Kevin said, yes, the capabilities are going up dramatically, and people are increasingly finding that it's a great place to actually go put their data and actually start getting value out of it.
That's excellent. A couple of more questions are coming. I think we do have time for a couple of more questions. One deals with, Scott, a concept you mentioned about using low code and business rule extraction tools. Mm-hmm. The question is really, what has been Deloitte's experience, specifically in financial industry? I'm not sure if you're able to comment, either Kevin, you or Scott, in making sure that all of these legacy business rules are actually still intact as they get extracted through this modernization, so that you're not actually breaking a rule that might be 50 years old. Are there any insights on making this transformation journey less painful?
Well, I think the first insight is that the journey is painful, no matter what. And so it's really a matter of making it less painful more reliable, more predictable, etc. A lot of the tools that are out there are increasingly AI enabled, right? They are increasingly automated. They're basically designed to help increase the productivity and the capability of the people doing the work by identifying the areas that you really need to go look at. And so there's, I would say, the capabilities are dramatically increasing as we go along in terms of what's actually possible. And in many cases, we have to be careful because perfection can be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
I would say the experience is actually similar in healthcare and financial services and everywhere else, which is at some point in time, if you have a burning platform, the answer is not, is there a painless solution, but how much are we going to hold our nose and move forward, and what is it that we're willing to live with?
I think that's well said. Obviously a lot of financial institutions are pursuing what we would call a kind of hollow out the core type of approach, where they're extracting key elements of logic or functionality from some of their legacy core system and modernizing that with a more flexible integration or orchestration layer. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're tapping into old systems that have lots of interlinkages that have been built up over time, that are sometimes not fully understood. And so it is not without risk and cost to do that, no matter how effective some of the tools are getting within that space.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I think that we'll take one more question. This is actually an interesting take, a very, very interesting, good question. On the topic of interplay and leveraging of academic research. I'm going to suggest that this means, are we seeing evidence of organizations that are relying more and more on, heavy science and math, artificial intelligence, algorithms, development of machine learning solutions? Are we seeing any evidence of some innovative, effective collaborations with academic institutions, partnerships with academia? Do we have any comments on that, Scott? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There is clearly a lot of talent in academic institutions, and I would also say that in many cases there is a lot of passion in academic institutions to have real problems for people to work on. And as a result, there are a number of organizations who've figured out useful ways to work with academics. I would say it like anything takes work, thought, and care. And the really important thing is aligning incentives and recognizing that the incentives of a researcher in an academic institution are different than the incentives for a commercial organization or a nonprofit organization or a government. And so just making sure that you're collectively clear on what you're after and structuring the agreements appropriately is actually a really great way to align things. But we actually do a fair amount of work with academic institutions here at Deloitte. And as long as you've thought through really hard, been really clear about communication and incentives, you can get some really great results.
Thank you, Scott. Kevin, anything else to add before we wrap it up?
No, I think that was well said. Thank you, Dalibor.
Excellent. Well, a couple of announcements before we actually close it in the last minutes. On 2 weeks from now, on March the 3rd, some of you might know we had a Tech Trends session number 3 scheduled. We are actually moving that session by a week to accommodate for Deloitte's AI Academy, where we are thrilled to be welcoming Jeffrey Hinton, a luminary, global luminary in AI science, and a researcher in neural networks. So for those who have registered for our March 3rd session in Tech Trends, your registration has already been updated to March the 10th. I'm going to follow up with an email to send you the information about the AI Academy to which I would invite you to register. Of course, it's going to be the same time as this session was planned. And so therefore, please do join us 3 weeks from now on March the 10th, when we are going to go through our next chapter of this Tech Trends Unveil with a deeper dive in data machine learning related trends. And then following that on March the 17th, the third chapter of the 3 final trends that deal with interaction of physical and digital and focus more on people. With that, I would like to thank our guest speakers, Scott and Kevin, very much for your time and for your insights. This was highly educational. And of course, for our audience members, thank you for spending the last hour with us. And we very much look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. With that, all the best.
Stay warm.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye now.
everybody.
Thanks all.